On the 14th of October, 1066, a battle took place in the south of England that greatly influenced the course of European history. Not far from Hastings, the English army led by King Harold II took a position on the hill, blocking the way to London for the invaders led by the Duke of Normandy. The two armies were roughly equal in number, and numbered around 7,000 to 8,000 men each. Under the banner of William of Normandy, warriors of various regions of France gathered. The Norman contingent was the most numerous, numbering about 4,000, 2,000 Bretons, and another 1,500 Franco-Flemish soldiers. The army was divided into branches, the majority of which consisted of infantry, which numbered about 4,000 soldiers. There were about 2,000 horsemen, and the smallest company was made up of archers only, 1,500 men strong. The English army included men of various different fighting capabilities. The most talented part was the 1,300 huscarls. These were professional soldiers, well armed and trained. The largest part of the army was made up of landowners' militias, the Fyrd. Their number was about 5,500, mostly well armed, but they lacked experience. Though in this case, 3 weeks ago, they did defeat a Viking army at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. There were also about 700 poor militiamen, armed with whatever they could find. In all likelihood, during the battle, the English were gradually separated, drawn into small groups of straggling troops. William's army was superior to the enemy in ranged combat, as archers were assigned to a separate branch of the army and outnumbered the enemy. King Harold's army relied heavily on thrown weapons. The English dismounted and left their horses behind, and took up a position on the hill. They formed a shield wall. In the forefront were the most capable and well-armed huscarls. The latter were the least armed. A small number of archers who were in the English army stood in a common line with the infantry. King Harold himself sits in the back, surrounded by his personal guard. The left flank of William's army was occupied by contingents from Brittany, Anjou, Poitou, Maine, and in the center was a detachment from Normandy. On the right flank stood the Franco-Flemish. The troops were in 3 lines. Ahead of them were archers, whose task was to weaken the enemy before attacking the main forces. There were infantry behind them, probably to break through the enemy's defense. And in the 3rd line was cavalry, for the final defeat of the enemy. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, the trumpets heralded the beginning of the battle. The archers moved forward and began firing upon the enemy. The English, with practically no bowmen, hid behind a wall of shields. This measure proved to be quite effective, as the hail of arrows did not have much effect on Harold's army. Then came the infantry. The soldiers slowly climbed up the hill. Approaching the enemy, they were under a hail of javelins. Then, they engaged in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The English wall of shields was a hard nut for the Normans to crack. Huscarls held steadfastly and repelled all attacks. In addition, Harold's army held a more comfortable position on the high ground. The French infantry eventually withdrew. Then William decided to bring the cavalry into the battle. The horsemen rushed to attack, but the steep slope did not allow them to speed up the horses for a powerful charge. As they approached the wall of shields, they also came under fire from javelins and other thrown weapons. Unable to penetrate the enemy formation, the riders used their spears at the mass of enemies, trying to poke a weak spot without exposing themselves to a counterblow. Then they rode off, only to attack again. On the left flank, a sudden panic broke out among the Bretons. The horsemen fled, taking the rest with them. At which time, the army heard the rumor of William's death, and panic spread to the center and began to penetrate the right flank, covering the entire army with fear. Some of the English pursued the Bretons, who were tied up by a stream in a swampy area. It was a critical moment in the battle, and William, seeing that he could now lose this battle, took off his helmet and rode in front of the army. "Look at me," he cried. "I am alive, and with God's help, victory will be ours. What happened to you? What made you flee? There is no going back. If you do not stop, neither of you will be saved." Having quelled the panic, William led the detachment and attacked the English who had come forward. The Normans surrounded them and killed every last one of them. Around noon, the battle came to a pause, with parties taking a breather and reorganizing their troops. William had to win the battle at all costs before dark. Otherwise, the next day, the morale of his army would be much lower. The English, who had successfully repelled the attack, would have fought with double the fighting spirit. After noon, the Norman army again tried to break through the shield wall. The archers pelted the enemy, but without much success. And the cavalry attack was easily repelled. William then decided to deceive and lure the English from the hill, and he ordered a false panic. Norman warriors had previously used this tactic at the Battle of Cassel in 1071, as well as at the Battle of Messina in 1060. But historians are still debating whether this was a military ruse or if the troops were truly panicked. Anyways, after another attack, the Normans fled and a part of the English tried to pursue them again. But the cavalry suddenly turned and came down on the enemy. As in the previous instance, the English infantry, which had become disorganized during the pursuit, were powerless against horsemen in the open and were completely destroyed. After suffering losses, the wall of shields became thinner. More and more inexperienced and poorly armed soldiers occupied the gaps and formed in the ranks. The final attack that decided the battle occurred at the end of the day. The archers were ordered to fire lobbing shots from behind the shield wall. The arrows began to reach their target, and many poorly equipped soldiers were wounded and incapacitated. The horsemen rushed forward again, this time breaking through the enemy line. Harold's bodyguards surrounded their king in an attempt to protect him, at which point an arrow hits his eye and the ruler falls to the ground. By this time, both of his brothers were likely dead. The English army, effectively beheaded, fled, except for the king's personal guard, which surrounded its ruler and prepared for a last stand. The Normans pursued the enemy relentlessly until nightfall. The Battle of Hastings was decisive in the capture of the English throne by William the Conqueror. Here, his main rivals to the throne died, King Harold and his brothers, as well as a significant part of the English aristocracy, which opposed the Duke of Normandy.